I'll be gentle. What really happened when a massive rancher took a farmhand all his size? The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and neither had the silence between us. I stood in the barn doorway, watching the water pour off the roof in sheets, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Behind me, I heard his boots on the wooden floor, slow, deliberate steps that made every nerve in my body come alive. "Eli," his voice was low, almost breaking. "If you walk out that door right now, I won't stop you. But if you stay—" He paused, and I could hear him take a shaky breath. "If you stay, everything changes." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Because 3 months ago, I came to this ranch as just another farmhand looking for work, and now I was standing here, terrified and exhilarated, knowing that the man behind me, this massive, quiet rancher who'd somehow become my entire world, was about to say the words that would either ruin us or save us both. "My name is Eli Torres, and I'm 23 years old. 3 months ago, I was sleeping in my car in a truck stop parking lot outside Amarillo, down to my last $40 and wondering if maybe I should just call my parents and admit they were right about everything. I dropped out of college 2 years earlier to find myself, which is what privileged kids say when they're too scared to admit they have no idea what they're doing with their lives. I'd bounced from job to job, city to city, relationship to relationship, always running before things got too real, too complicated, too permanent. That's when I saw the job posting at the truck stop diner, farmhand needed, room and board included, hard work, honest pay, must be willing to learn. There was a phone number and an address for a ranch about 60 miles north. I called from the payphone in the diner parking lot, my hands shaking from too much coffee and not enough food. A man answered on the third ring. His voice was deep, measured, like he chose every word carefully before he spoke it. "Garrett Mackenzie," he said, and even through the crackling phone line, something about the way he said his own name made me stand up straighter. I told him about the posting, stumbling over my words, trying to sound more competent than I felt. He asked me 3 questions. Could I start immediately? Was I afraid of hard work? And did I have any experience with horses? I said yes to the first 2 and lied about the third. He was quiet for a moment, and I thought he could somehow hear the lie through the phone. Then he gave me directions to the ranch and told me to be there by sunrise. I arrived at the Mackenzie Ranch just as the sky was turning from black to deep purple, that brief moment before dawn when the world feels like it's holding its breath. The ranch was bigger than I'd expected. Hundreds of acres of rolling grassland, wooden fences that seemed to go on forever, a large main house with a wraparound porch, and several outbuildings scattered across the property. I parked my beat-up Honda Civic next to a row of pickup trucks that all looked like they'd survived multiple wars, and I sat there for a moment, wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. That's when I saw him for the first time. Garrett Mackenzie stepped out of the barn, and I literally forgot how to breathe. He was massive, not just tall, though he had to be at least 6'5", but broad-shouldered and thick with the kind of muscle that comes from years of physical labor, not a gym. He wore faded jeans, work boots that had seen better days, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that looked like they could bend steel. His hair was dark brown, just starting to show hints of gray at the temples, and he had a beard that was neatly trimmed but substantial. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. Even from across the yard, I could see they were an impossible shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the ocean. He looked at me, really looked at me, in a way that made me feel completely exposed, like he could see every lie I'd ever told, every mistake I'd ever made, every fear I'd never admitted out loud. I got out of my car on legs that suddenly felt unsteady, and he walked over with long, measured strides. "Eli Torres." His voice was even deeper in person, resonant and calm. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He extended his hand, and when I took it, his grip was firm and warm and so large that my entire hand disappeared into his. "Garrett Mackenzie, welcome to the ranch." He held my hand for just a second longer than necessary, his eyes searching my face, and I felt something shift in my chest, a tightening, a warming, something I couldn't name. Then he let go, gestured toward the barn, and said, "Let me show you around. Work starts in 20 minutes. The first few weeks were brutal. I woke up at 4:30 every morning to the sound of Garrett's knock on the door of the small cabin he'd set me up in, a one-room structure about 50 yards from the main house, with a bed, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom that had seen better days but was clean and functional. By 5, we were in the barn feeding the horses, mucking out stalls, checking fences, mending equipment. Garrett worked like a machine, steady, tireless, efficient, and he expected the same from me. I'd lied about knowing how to work with horses, and he knew it within the first hour. But instead of firing me or calling me out on it, he simply started teaching me. He showed me how to approach a horse, how to read their body language, how to handle them with confidence and gentleness at the same time. He was patient in a way that surprised me. He never raised his voice, never showed frustration, even when I made the same mistake 3 times in a row. He'd just pause, demonstrate again, and say, "Try it one more time. You'll get it." And slowly, impossibly, I did get it. My hands, which had only ever been good at typing papers and scrolling through my phone, learned to tie knots and handle reins and feel the difference between a horse that was calm and one that was spooked. My body, which had been soft from years of sitting in classrooms and coffee shops, started to change. My shoulders broadened. My arms developed actual muscle definition. My hands grew calloused and strong. I started to sleep like the dead, exhausted in a way that felt clean and honest, not the anxious exhaustion I'd carried for years. Garrett and I fell into a rhythm. We'd work side by side from sunrise until mid-afternoon, taking a break for lunch that we usually ate on the porch of the main house, sandwiches and coffee that Garrett made with an efficiency that suggested he'd been feeding himself for a long time. He didn't talk much, but when he did, I found myself hanging on every word. He'd tell me about the ranch, which had been in his family for 3 generations, or about the horses, each of which he knew by name and temperament. He'd ask me questions too, where I was from, what I'd studied, what made me leave it all behind, and I found myself answering more honestly than I intended. "I didn't fit," I said one day, surprising myself with the admission. We were sitting on the porch drinking coffee as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. College, my family's expectations, the person they wanted me to be, I just didn't fit into any of it. Garrett was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the landscape in front of us. Then he said, "Sometimes not fitting is a sign you're meant for something different, not something wrong." The way he said it made me think he wasn't just talking about me, and I wanted to ask what he meant, but I didn't. Not yet. At night, I'd go back to my cabin, shower off the day's sweat and dirt, and lie in bed replaying conversations, analyzing glances, wondering why I couldn't stop thinking about the way Garrett's hands moved when he worked, or the sound of his laugh when I managed to say something that amused him, or the way he sometimes looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, like he was trying to figure me out, the same way I was trying to figure him out. The shift started small. 6 weeks into the job, we were in the barn during a thunderstorm, waiting out the worst of it before heading back to our respective houses. I was sitting on a hay bale, watching the rain through the open barn door when Garrett sat down next to me. He was closer than he usually got, and I could feel the heat radiating off his body, smell the scent of hay and rain and something that was distinctly him. "You settling in okay?" he asked, his voice low under the sound of rain on the roof. "Yeah," I said, and it was true. "I like it here, I like the work." I paused, then added, "I like working with you." The words came out more vulnerable than I intended, and I felt my face heat up. Garrett turned to look at me, and our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us looked away. The air between us felt charged, electric, like the storm outside had somehow gotten inside the barn and was crackling between our bodies. His eyes dropped to my mouth for just a fraction of a second, so quick I almost thought I imagined it, then back to my eyes. "I like working with you too, Eli," he said quietly, and the way he said my name made something in my chest tighten almost painfully. Then he stood up abruptly, clearing his throat. "Rain's letting up. We should head in." He walked toward the door without looking back, and I sat there for a moment longer, my heart pounding, trying to understand what had just happened and what it meant. After that night, Things changed in ways so subtle I couldn't point to specific moments, but I felt them everywhere. Garrett started finding reasons to touch me, a hand on my shoulder when he was showing me something, fingers brushing mine when he handed me tools, his body close to mine when we were working in tight spaces. Every touch felt deliberate, lingering just a second too long to be casual. And I started doing the same, finding excuses to stand near him, to lean in when he was talking, to let our hands brush when we were working side by side. We started spending more time together after work too. Garrett would invite me to the main house for dinner, and we'd cook together. Or rather, he'd cook while I chopped vegetables and tried not to stare at the way his hands moved, confident and sure. We'd eat at his kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing, and afterward we'd sit on the porch with beers, watching the stars come out, the conversation flowing easier than it ever had with anyone else in my life. One night, about 2 months into my time at the ranch, Garrett told me about his ex-wife. They'd married young, he said, because it was what everyone expected, what his family wanted, what made sense for the ranch. They tried for 5 years, but eventually they both had to admit they were living a lie. She wanted to be loved, Garrett said, staring out into the darkness, and I couldn't give her what she needed, not because I didn't care about her, but because. He trailed off, and the silence stretched between us, heavy with things unsaid. Because you weren't attracted to her, I said softly, my heart in my throat. It wasn't a question. Garrett turned to look at me, and even in the dim porch light I could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear and hope warring in his expression. No, he said quietly, I wasn't. He took a shaky breath. It took me a long time to admit why, even longer to accept it. The air between us felt impossibly thick. I wanted to reach for him, to close the distance, to tell him I understood because I was the same way, but fear held me frozen in my chair. The jealousy started 2 weeks later. A rancher from a neighboring property, a guy named Marcus who was about my age and objectively handsome in a clean-cut, all-American way, stopped by to discuss some kind of cattle business with Garrett. Marcus was friendly, charming, and he paid a lot of attention to me, asking about my background, complimenting my work, suggesting we should grab drinks sometime in town. I was polite but non-committal, but I noticed the way Garrett's jaw tightened, the way his eyes went cold and distant. After Marcus left, Garrett was quiet, almost withdrawn. When I asked if everything was okay, he said, Marcus is a good guy, comes from a solid family. You two would probably have a lot in common. The words felt like a dismissal, like he was trying to push me toward someone else, and it hurt more than I wanted to admit. I'm not interested in Marcus, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Garrett looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something break in his expression, hope and fear and longing all mixed together. What are you interested in, Eli? He asked, his voice rough, almost desperate. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words stuck in my throat. I was terrified of saying it out loud, of making it real, of risking this thing between us that had become the most important thing in my life. So instead of answering, I looked away, and after a moment Garrett walked back toward the barn, his shoulders tight with tension. We started avoiding each other after that. Not completely. We still worked together every day, but the easy closeness was gone, replaced by a careful distance that hurt like a physical ache. Garrett stopped inviting me to dinner. I stopped lingering on the porch after work. We spoke in polite, professional tones, and every word felt like a lie, like we were both pretending not to feel what was so obvious it practically shimmered in the air between us. I started questioning everything. Maybe I'd imagined the tension. Maybe Garrett's confession about his ex-wife had nothing to do with me. Maybe he was just being kind to a lost 23-year-old who showed up on his ranch with nothing. And I'd turned it into something it wasn't because I was lonely and confused, and maybe a little bit in love with a man I barely knew, but who felt more real to me than anyone I'd ever met. I considered leaving. I even started looking at job postings in the evenings, planning out what I'd say, how I'd explain why I needed to go. But every time I thought about actually packing my car and driving away, my chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. The ranch had become home in a way nowhere else ever had, and Garrett Garrett had become the reason I woke up every morning with something that felt like purpose. The breaking point came on a Saturday night. There was a storm rolling in. You could feel it in the air, that electric pressure that comes before thunder and lightning. I was in my cabin, trying to distract myself with a book I wasn't reading, when there was a knock on my door. My heart leapt into my throat. I knew it was Garrett before I even opened the door. I'd learned to recognize his knock, the pattern and rhythm of it. When I opened the door, he was standing there in the rain which had just started to fall, his hair already wet, his eyes wild with something I'd never seen before. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. I stepped back without a word and he walked in, bringing the smell of rain and earth and that indefinable scent that was just him. He stood in the middle of my small cabin, water dripping onto the floor, his chest rising and falling like he'd been running. "I can't do this anymore," he said, and my heart dropped into my stomach. This was it. He was going to fire me, tell me to leave, end whatever this was before it could become something real. "I can't pretend I don't feel it," he continued, taking a step toward me. "I can't watch you every day and not tell you that you're all I think about. I can't keep my distance when all I want is to be close to you." "I can't," his voice broke, and he ran a hand through his wet hair, frustration and longing etched into every line of his face. I stared at him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "Garrett," I whispered, but I didn't know what else to say. He took another step closer, and now we were barely 2 feet apart, close enough that I could see the water droplets caught in his beard, the way his eyes were searching my face desperately. "Tell me I'm crazy," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Tell me I'm reading this all wrong, that you don't feel it too, and I'll walk out that door and we'll go back to how things were. But Eli, if there's even a chance." I didn't let him finish. I closed the distance between us in one step and kissed him. It wasn't graceful or practiced. I'd only kissed a handful of people in my life, and never someone who meant this much. But the moment my lips touched his, everything else fell away. Garrett made a sound low in his throat, surprise and relief and need all mixed together, and then his arms came around me, pulling me against him with a strength that should have been frightening, but instead felt like coming home. He kissed me back like he was drowning and I was air, his hands cradling my face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the intensity of his mouth on mine. I gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, wanting to eliminate even the molecules of air between us. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. "Eli," he breathed, and my name had never sounded like that before, like a prayer, like a promise, like everything he'd been holding back for months. "I feel it too," I said, my voice shaking. "I've felt it since the first day. I just didn't know how to tell you. I was scared." Garrett pulled back just enough to look at me, and the expression on his face, tender and fierce and full of wonder, made tears prick at my eyes. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "I'm terrified. But I'm more scared of not taking this chance, of letting you slip away because I was too afraid to be honest." We stood there in the middle of my cabin, the rain hammering on the roof, thunder rumbling in the distance, holding each other like we could keep the whole world at bay if we just held on tight enough. "What happens now?" I asked eventually, because I needed to hear him say it, needed to know this was real and not just a moment that would evaporate in the morning light. Garrett's arms tightened around me. "Now," he said quietly, "we figure it out together, if you want to." "I want to," I said, and I'd never meant anything more in my entire life. Garrett smiled then, a real smile, the kind I'd only seen a handful of times, the kind that transformed his whole face and made him look younger, less burdened. He kissed me again, slower this time, thorough and deep, like he was memorizing the taste and feel of me. When we broke apart, he said, "I should probably go back to the house." But neither of us moved. We couldn't seem to let go of each other. "Stay," I said, the word barely audible over the rain. "Just for a little while. We don't have to, I just want you here." Garrett searched my face, then nodded. We moved to the small couch and he pulled me against his side, his arm around my shoulders, my head resting on his chest where I could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady and real. We stayed like that for hours, talking in low voices about everything we'd been holding back, fears and hopes and all the moments that had led us to this point. Garrett told me about growing up on the ranch. about the pressure to be a certain kind of man, to want certain things, to fit into a mold that never quite felt right. He told me about the years of confusion and denial, the marriage that ended in quiet devastation, the loneliness of living honestly in a place where honesty sometimes came at a steep price. I told him about my own journey, the years of feeling different, the relationships that never quite worked, the running that never led anywhere, the fear that there was something fundamentally broken in me. "There's nothing broken in you," Garrett said fiercely, tilting my chin up so I had to look at him. "You're perfect exactly as you are." The words cracked something open in my chest, and I kissed him again, pouring everything I felt into it, gratitude and desire and the beginning of something that might become love if we let it. We held each other as the storm raged outside, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt safe, anchored, found. The next morning I woke up on the couch, Garrett's arms still around me, early light filtering through the cabin windows. He was already awake, watching me with an expression so tender it made my breath catch. "Morning," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair off my forehead. "Morning," I replied, smiling up at him. We stayed like that for a moment, just looking at each other before Garrett said reluctantly, "We should probably get up. Work doesn't stop just because." He trailed off, but I knew what he meant. We stood and there was a moment of awkwardness. Should we kiss goodbye? Were we a couple now? What did this mean for work, for the ranch, for everything? But then Garrett reached out and pulled me into a hug, solid and reassuring. "We'll take it slow," he said against my hair. "We'll figure it out as we go, okay?" I nodded against his chest, relief flooding through me. He kissed the top of my head, then stepped back, his hand trailing down my arm to squeeze my hand briefly before he let go. "See you in 20 minutes, he said with a small smile, and then he was gone. Work that day was different. We were still professional, still focused on the tasks at hand, but there was an undercurrent of awareness, of connection that made every moment feel charged. When Garrett handed me a tool, our fingers brushed and lingered. When we worked side by side, our shoulders touched, our bodies gravitating toward each other. And every so often, I'd catch him looking at me with an expression that made my stomach flip. Want and affection, and something deeper that we were both still too cautious to name. The weeks that followed were the happiest of my life. Garrett and I were careful around the ranch hands who came to help during busy periods, keeping things professional. But when we were alone, we let ourselves be what we were becoming, partners, in work and in something more. We fell into a new rhythm, one that included stolen kisses in the barn, evenings spent cooking dinner together, nights talking on the porch until the stars came out. Garrett was teaching me not just about ranch work, but about what it meant to be cared for, to be seen, to be wanted exactly as I was. He was also teaching me about patience and gentleness. One evening we were in his house, sitting close on the couch, kissing in a way that was getting heated, both of us breathing hard when Garrett pulled back, his hands framing my face. "I want you to know," he said, his voice rough with restraint, "that we don't have to rush this, any of it. I want to do this right." I could see the effort it was taking him to say it, the desire warring with his need to protect me, to make sure I felt safe and sure. "I know," I said, touching his face, feeling the scratch of his beard against my palm. "I trust you, Garrett, completely." His eyes closed and he turned his head to kiss my palm. "That means everything to me," he whispered. We held each other, and even though we didn't go further that night, it felt intimate in a different way. The intimacy of trust, of knowing someone would put your comfort above their own desire, that you mattered more than the moment. But not everything was easy. About 3 months into our relationship, which is what it was now, even though we hadn't labeled it with words, I overheard a conversation in town that shook me. I'd gone to the feed store to pick up supplies, and 2 men were talking near the checkout. I heard Garrett's name and paused, not meaning to eavesdrop but unable to help it. "Heard he's got a young guy working for him now," one said. "Living right there on the property." "You thinking what I'm thinking?" the other replied, his tone suggestive and cruel. They both laughed and one added, "I always wondered about Garrett after the divorce. Guess now we know." The words hit me like a physical blow. I paid for the supplies in a daze and drove back to the ranch, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I got back, Garrett was in the barn, and he took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, coming over immediately, his hand on my shoulder. I told him what I'd heard, watching his expression darken with each word. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I knew this might happen. Small towns, small minds, people talk." He looked at me and I could see the worry in his eyes. "If this is too much, if you want to," I cut him off, grabbing his hand. "No, I don't want to leave. I don't care what people say." But even as I said it, I felt a flicker of fear. Did I mean it? Could I handle being the subject of gossip, of judgment, of whispers? Garrett squeezed my hand. "It might get harder before it gets easier," he said quietly. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" I looked at him, this strong, gentle man who'd given me purpose and home and something that felt more real than anything I'd ever known, and I realized I was more sure of this than I'd been of anything. "I'm sure," I said, "as long as we're in this together." Garrett pulled me into his arms, holding me tight. "Always," he murmured. "We're in this together." The gossip did get worse. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the stares when we went into town together, the way conversations stopped when we walked by, the cold shoulders from people who'd been friendly before. It hurt more than I expected. The judgment, the assumptions, the feeling of being reduced to a stereotype or a scandal. There were days I wanted to hide, to go back to being invisible, to not have to see the disapproval in strangers' eyes. But Garrett never wavered. He held my hand in public when I needed the reassurance, stood by my side when conversations got awkward, and made it clear through both words and actions that he wasn't ashamed of what we had. "Let them talk," he said one evening when I was particularly down. "Their opinions don't define us. What we have is real and good, and that's all that matters." His conviction gave me strength, and slowly, I started to internalize it too. We also found unexpected allies. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the diner in town, started making a point of being extra friendly, chatting with us when we came in, making it clear she didn't give a damn what anyone thought. A few of the younger ranchers in the area reached out to Garrett, offering support in quiet, understated ways. And one Sunday, Garrett's mother, who lived 2 hours away and who I'd been terrified to meet, drove out to the ranch, took one look at us, and pulled me into a hug. "You make my son happy," she said simply. "That's all I need to know." As summer turned to fall, Garrett and I settled into a life that felt astonishingly normal and wonderfully extraordinary all at once. We worked the ranch. We made plans for the future. We argued about small things and made up quickly. We learned each other's rhythms and quirks and fears. We also learned how to be physically intimate in a way that felt right for both of us, slow and careful and full of trust, moments that deepened our connection in ways that words never could. One evening in late October, we were on the porch watching the sunset, Garrett's arm around my shoulders, my head resting against him. "I love you," I said, the words surprising me as they came out, even though I'd been feeling them for weeks. Garrett went very still, then turned to look at me, his eyes searching my face. "You mean that?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded, suddenly nervous. "I know it's fast and maybe it's too soon to say it, but I do. I love you." Garrett's eyes filled with tears, which I'd never seen before, and he cupped my face in his hands. "I love you too, Eli. So damn much it terrifies me sometimes." He kissed me then, gentle and deep, and I felt it all the way to my soul, the rightness of it, the certainty, the sense that after years of wandering I'd finally found where I belonged. When we pulled apart, we were both smiling, both a little tearful, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we'd found in each other. "Move into the house with me," Garrett said, suddenly surprising me. "I know we've been taking things slow, but I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build a life with you, not just date you while you live 50 yards away." I laughed, a little overwhelmed but completely sure. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes." Garrett grinned, that transformative smile I'd come to treasure, and kissed me again. "Best decision you've ever made," he murmured against my lips. Moving in together was an adjustment, but a good one. We learned to navigate shared space, to respect each other's need for quiet or closeness, to communicate about small annoyances before they became big problems. We also learned the joy of domesticity, cooking together, doing dishes while laughing about the day, sharing a bed and all the intimacy that came with it. The ranch became not just Garrett's property but our project, our shared dream. We talked about expanding the operation, maybe taking on a few more hands, building up the business so it could sustain us both comfortably. I also started to think about the future in ways I never had before. For the first time in my life, I could imagine staying in one place, putting down roots, building something lasting. I started taking online classes in ranch management and sustainable agriculture, wanting to contribute more, to be a true partner in every sense. Garrett supported every step, encouraged every idea, and made me feel like my contributions mattered like I mattered. There were still hard days. Days when the gossip got to me, when I felt the weight of being different in a place that valued conformity, when I wondered if I was strong enough for this life. But Garrett was always there, steady and sure, reminding me that we were building something real, that the opinions of small-minded people didn't define our worth or our love. And on the days when Garrett struggled, with the pressure of running the ranch, with old wounds from his past, with his own fears and insecurities, I was there for him, offering the same strength and support he'd always given me. As winter approached, we fell into a comfortable rhythm that felt like permanence. We worked hard during the day, came home to each other at night, and built a life that was simple and honest and full of quiet joy. On particularly cold evenings, we'd sit by the fire in the living room, Garrett reading while I worked on my classes, our legs tangled together on the couch, perfectly content in the silence. One December evening, Garrett looked up from his book and said, "I want to ask you something." His tone was serious enough that I closed my laptop, giving him my full attention. He set his book aside and turned to face me, taking my hands in his. "I know we've only been together for a few months, and I know we're still figuring things out, but I'm sure of this, I'm sure of us." He took a deep breath. "I want you to know that this is it for me. You're it for me, and I want to make it official." My heart started pounding. "Official how?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Garrett smiled, a little nervous but mostly certain. "I want to make you a partner in the ranch, legally. I want your name on the deed, on the business license, all of it. I want to make sure you know that this is your home, your future, as much as it is mine. And someday, when we're both ready, I want to marry you." Tears spilled down my cheeks before I could stop them, and I threw my arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes," I said against his neck. "Yes to all of it, the ranch, the partnership, the future, everything, yes." Garrett held me tight, and I could feel his shoulders shaking with emotion. "I love you so much," he said, his voice rough. "You walked onto this ranch with nothing, and somehow you gave me everything I didn't know I needed." I pulled back to look at him, cupping his face in my hands. "You gave me everything too," I said. "You gave me a home, a purpose, love. You gave me a reason to stop running and start living." That night we made love with a tenderness and intensity that felt sacred, like we were sealing a promise, marking a beginning. Afterward, we lay tangled together in bed, Garrett's fingers tracing patterns on my skin, my head resting on his chest where I could hear his heartbeat. "How did I get so lucky?" I murmured, half to myself. Garrett kissed the top of my head. "We both got lucky," he said. "We found each other when we both needed it most. That's not luck, that's fate." I smiled, letting my eyes drift closed, feeling safe and loved and home in a way I'd never imagined possible. Outside, snow was starting to fall, blanketing the ranch in quiet white, and inside, in Garrett's arms, I felt the rightness of it all settle into my bones. This was home. This was love. This was the life I'd been searching for without knowing what I was looking for. The months that followed were full of hard work and joy in equal measure. We officially made me a partner in the ranch, filing all the legal paperwork, and Garrett insisted on having a small celebration with the few close friends and family members who'd supported us from the beginning. His mother made a toast, raising her glass and saying, "To Eli and Garrett, may your partnership be long and your love be strong." Everyone cheered, and I felt Garrett's hand find mine under the table, squeezing gently. Spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. We decided to expand the ranch's operations, taking on a few rescue horses and starting a small training program. It was Garrett's dream, something he'd always wanted to do but never had the help or support to make happen. Working together, we transformed one of the old barns into a proper training facility, and we both threw ourselves into learning everything we could about horse rehabilitation and training. The work was demanding, but it was also deeply rewarding. Watching horses that had been neglected or abused slowly learn to trust again, seeing them grow stronger and healthier under our care, felt like participating in something meaningful. And doing it alongside Garrett, watching him work with infinite patience and gentleness, falling even more in love with him every single day. It was everything I'd never known I wanted. We also started talking seriously about marriage. We couldn't legally marry in our state yet, but we started planning a commitment ceremony, something to celebrate our relationship in front of the people who mattered. We kept it small and simple, just close friends and family, a ceremony at the ranch, vows we wrote ourselves. As we planned, I found myself amazed at how far we'd both come, how much we'd grown together, how the scared, lost person I'd been when I first arrived at the ranch felt like a different lifetime. The ceremony took place on a warm June evening, almost exactly 1 year after I'd first driven onto the Mackenzie Ranch with $40 and no plan. We stood under an arch we'd built ourselves, decorated with wildflowers from the property, and spoke vows that laid bare our hearts. Garrett's voice shook as he promised to love me, to stand by me, to build a life with me, and I could barely get through my own vows for crying. When we kissed, our small gathering erupted in cheers, and Garrett held me close, whispering, "Forever, Eli. This is forever." The celebration afterward was exactly what we'd wanted: simple food, good music, laughter, and dancing under the stars. Mrs. Henderson from the diner brought her famous pie. Garrett's mother cried happy tears all evening, and even a few of the neighboring ranchers who'd initially been cold to us showed up to offer their congratulations. As the evening wound down, Garrett and I slipped away from the party, walking out to the fence line where we could see the whole ranch spread out before us, bathed in moonlight. "You know what's amazing?" I said, leaning against him. "A year ago I was sleeping in my car, convinced I'd never find where I belonged, and now look at us." Garrett wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "You did find where you belong," he said softly. "You belong here with me, building this life together." I turned in his arms to face him, and the love in his eyes still took my breath away, even after all this time. "I love you," I said, for the 1,000th time and the first time all at once. "I love you too," Garrett replied, kissing me gently. "Now and always." We stood there for a long time, holding each other under the stars, two men who'd found each other against the odds and built something real, something lasting, something worth every struggle and every risk. This was home. This was love. This was everything. 3 months later. The ranch was thriving. Our training program was gaining a reputation, and we had a waiting list of horses people wanted us to work with. Garrett and I worked harder than ever, but it was the kind of work that fulfilled us, that made us fall into bed exhausted but satisfied every night. We'd also started talking about the future in more concrete terms, about saving up to buy the neighboring property when it went up for sale, about maybe adopting a dog, about all the small ways we could continue building the life we'd created together. One evening in late September, we were on our porch where so many important moments had happened, when Garrett said, "I've been thinking." I looked over at him, noting the slight nervousness in his expression. "About what?" I asked. He took my hand, lacing our fingers together. "About how when you first showed up here, I never could have imagined this, any of this. I was just a lonely rancher going through the motions, and then you arrived and everything changed." I squeezed his hand. "You changed my life too," I said. "You gave me purpose, direction, love, everything I was missing." Garrett smiled, that soft, private smile he reserved just for me. "I know we've already had our ceremony, but there's something I still want to do when the time is right." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, and my breath caught. "This is a promise," he said, opening it to reveal two simple, elegant rings. "A promise that when it's legal, I want to marry you for real, officially, in every way that matters." Tears blurred my vision as I looked at the rings, then at Garrett, his face full of hope and love and commitment. "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. 1,000 times yes." He slipped one of the rings onto my finger, and I did the same for him, and we held each other as the sun set over the ranch, over our home, over the life we'd built from nothing but hope and hard work and love. 6 months later, winter had returned, but this time, I wasn't facing it alone. Garrett and I were stronger than ever, our partnership in both work and life running like a well-oiled machine. We'd successfully expanded the ranch, taken on 2 part-time employees who knew about our relationship and didn't care, and established ourselves as one of the most reputable horse training operations in the region. We'd also become more involved in the local LGBTQ+ community, offering support and resources to young people who were struggling with the same issues we'd both faced. The gossip had never completely died down, but we'd learned to live with it, to let it roll off our backs. What mattered was the life we'd built, the love we shared, the respect we'd earned from the people whose opinions actually counted. And slowly, even some of the people who'd been most judgmental had softened, seeing the evidence of our character in how we lived our lives, with integrity, hard work, and kindness. One particularly cold evening, we were in bed, Garrett reading while I worked on my laptop, when he suddenly said, "You know what I just realized?" I looked up. "What?" He set his book aside and turned to me, his expression tender. "I'm happy, truly, deeply happy. For the first time in my entire life, I wake up every morning and feel grateful for exactly where I am and who I'm with, and that's because of you." I felt tears prick at my eyes, overwhelmed by the simplicity and sincerity of the statement. "I'm happy too," I said, setting my laptop aside and moving into his arms. "Happier than I ever thought possible." Garrett held me close, and we lay there in comfortable silence, listening to the wind outside and the crackling of the fire downstairs, perfectly content in each other's presence. This was what love looked like. Not just the grand gestures and dramatic moments, but the quiet evenings, the shared work, the absolute certainty that you were exactly where you belonged. 1 year later, the ranch had become more than we'd ever dreamed. We'd purchased the neighboring property, expanded our operations significantly, and established a nonprofit arm focused on equine therapy for at-risk youth. Garrett and I worked tirelessly, but we also made sure to carve out time for each other, for the relationship that was the foundation of everything we'd built. We took a week-long vacation to the mountains, the first real vacation either of us had taken in years, and spent it hiking, talking, and falling even more deeply in love. We also received news that our state was finally going to legalize same-sex marriage. When Garrett told me, having heard it on the radio while he was in town, he was crying big, silent tears rolling down his face. "We can do it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We can actually get married legally for real." I grabbed him, holding him tight, both of us crying and laughing at the same time. "We're getting married," I said, amazed and joyful and overwhelmed. "We're actually getting married." We planned a small ceremony at the courthouse on the first day it was legal, not wanting to wait another moment. We wore our best clothes, Garrett in a suit that made him look devastatingly handsome, me in slacks and a button-down, and we stood before a justice of the peace with our closest friends and family as witnesses. When the officiant said, "You may kiss your husband," Garrett pulled me into his arms and kissed me like it was the first time and the last time and every time in between, and I kissed him back with everything I had. The present day. It's been almost 3 years since I first drove onto the Mackenzie Ranch with nothing but a beat-up car and a lot of baggage. Now, I wake up every morning in our house, not just Garrett's house, but our house, next to the man I love more than anything in the world. We've built a life that's rich and full and meaningful, a partnership that's equal parts work and love, a future that looks bright and secure and full of possibility. The ranch thrives. Our training program is nationally recognized. Our nonprofit has helped dozens of young people find healing and hope. And Garrett and I, we're stronger than ever, our love deepened by every challenge we've faced together, every obstacle we've overcome, every moment of joy we've shared. We still have hard days, still face judgment from some corners, still navigate the complexities of running a business and a marriage and a life. But we face it all together, hand in hand, partners in every sense of the word. Sometimes, late at night, I lie awake and marvel at the journey that brought me here. The scared, lost kid who showed up with $40 has become a man who knows who he is, what he wants, and where he belongs. And Garrett, this massive, gentle rancher who opened his home and his heart to a stranger, has become my husband, my partner, my home, my everything. We've built something real and lasting, something worth fighting for, something that makes every struggle and every risk worthwhile. This is our life. This is our love. This is our happily ever after, still being written one day at a time, one moment at a time, one shared dream at a time. And I wouldn't change a single thing. Epilogue 5 years later. The ranch house was full of noise and laughter. Garrett's mother was in the kitchen, making her famous apple pie. Mrs. Henderson from the diner was chatting with a few of our employees on the porch. And in the living room, Garrett and I were playing with our newly adopted son, a 3-year-old named Lucas who'd come into our lives 6 months ago and immediately wrapped us both around his tiny finger. "Daddy, look," Lucas shouted, showing me the drawing he'd made, a stick-figure version of our family with the horses. "That's beautiful, buddy," I said, scooping him up and kissing his cheek. He giggled and wriggled free, running to Garrett and demanding the same treatment. Garrett obliged, lifting Lucas high in the air and making him laugh even harder. Watching them together, I felt my chest swell with so much love I could barely contain it. This family we'd built, this home we'd created, this life we'd forged from nothing but love and hard work and stubborn hope, this was everything. Garrett caught my eye over Lucas's head and smiled, that private, tender smile that was just for me, and I smiled back, thinking about that first day I'd driven onto this ranch, never imagining where it would lead. I thought about the barn where Garrett had first told me everything would change if I stayed. I thought about all the moments since, the first kiss, the first "I love you," the wedding, the adoption. And I thought about all the moments still to come, watching Lucas grow, continuing to build the ranch, growing old with Garrett, creating memories and traditions and a legacy of love. This was my life. This was my family. This was my home, and it was more than I'd ever dreamed possible. Garrett set Lucas down and walked over to me, pulling me into his arms for a kiss that was sweet and familiar and still made my heart race after all these years. "I love you," he murmured against my lips. "I love you too," I replied. "Now and always." Lucas ran over and wedged himself between us, demanding his own hug, and we both laughed, wrapping him up in our arms, holding our little family close. This was happiness. This was love. This was home. And we'd built it together, one day, one choice, one moment of courage at a time. And I knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning of our forever. The end.